I was still in my uniform. Boots still on. My daughter asleep on my shoulder. And my husband threw a DNA test on the coffee table and told a room full of his relatives that she wasn't mine. 12 people. 12 faces staring at me like I was the one who had done something wrong. "This isn't my daughter," Marcus said. He didn't yell it. He said it flat, calm, like he'd rehearsed it. Like he wanted every single person in that room to hear exactly those 5 words. My mother-in-law didn't wait for me to speak. She pointed at the front door. "Get out of my house." I hadn't set my bag down yet. I hadn't even said hello. And I had no idea, standing there with my daughter's heartbeat against my chest, that the man who forged that test had already spent months planning this exact moment, the money, the mistress, the lie, all of it, timed for the night I finally came home. I also had no idea that in about 8 seconds, the front door was going to open again. And the person walking through it was about to make every single one of them go silent. Captain Reyes. Every single person in that living room went still. But to understand how I ended up on my own porch being accused of a lie I never told, I need to take you back to that morning, 12 hours earlier, when I still believed I had a family waiting for me. I'd spent the last 6 weeks at Camp Pendleton finishing a training rotation that had eaten every ounce of energy I had left. 18-hour days, sand in every seam of my uniform, and a phone that only worked in 15-minute windows if I was lucky. The one thing that kept me moving was the thought of Lily's face when I walked through the door. That morning my phone finally had signal, and a text came through from Marcus. "Come home tonight. Mom's cooking. It's going to be a good one, I promise." I remember smiling at that message like an idiot. Things between Marcus and me had been strained for almost a year, short phone calls, missed video chats, attention that had crept into every conversation we had about my career. His mother, Diane, had never made a secret of the fact that she thought a mother's place wasn't 3,000 miles away in a training exercise. But that text felt different. Warm. Like maybe we were finally turning a corner. I picked Lily up from my sister's house, where she'd been staying while I was away, and the second she saw me she screamed "Mama," so loud the neighbors probably heard it. She wrapped her little arms around my neck and refused to let go the entire drive home, babbling about a butterfly she'd seen and a cookie she wasn't supposed to have had. I remember thinking, this is what all of it is for. When I pulled into the driveway and saw every car Marcus's family owned lined up along the curb, I actually felt a rush of relief. A welcome home dinner. Maybe Diane really was trying. Maybe things really were going to be different. I was wrong about all of it. The moment I stepped inside carrying Lily, the warmth of the porch light disappeared behind me. Nobody stood up. Nobody said welcome home. The room felt like a courtroom that had already reached its verdict before I walked in. Marcus held up the folder. Diane pointed toward the door. And that's when General Robert Walsh stepped through it behind me, still in uniform, 3 stars catching the light from the hallway. I'd served under General Walsh for almost 4 years. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to raise his voice to make a room go quiet. His presence did that on its own. He looked around at the crowded living room, at Marcus's pale face, at Diane's finger still hovering near the door, and finally at Lily, whose lower lip had begun to tremble against my shoulder. "I seem to have interrupted something," he said evenly. Marcus straightened. "General Walsh, sir, this is a family matter." "So I gathered." His eyes moved to the folder in Marcus's hand. "May I?" Marcus hesitated before handing it over. The general put on his reading glasses and scanned the document in complete silence while the entire room held its breath. After what felt like an eternity, he lowered the paper and asked one question. Who administered this test? Marcus named a lab I'd never heard of. Was Captain Reyes present for the sample collection? No. Was there a court order authorizing it? Marcus said nothing. Was the chain of custody documented in any way? Silence again. The general folded the paper and set it back on the table with a quiet precision that somehow felt louder than shouting. In 32 years of service, I've learned the difference between evidence and a piece of paper someone printed to look like evidence. This, he tapped it once, is the second one. Diane's arms tightened across her chest. It proves she cheated on my son. No, ma'am. It proves nothing at all. He turned to me. Captain Reyes, did you consent to a paternity test? No, sir. Were you informed one had been performed? No, sir. He nodded once, like a man confirming something he'd already suspected. Then he looked directly at Marcus. I'd advise everyone in this room to stop making accusations until the truth is actually established. Captain Reyes, I think it's best you and your daughter leave tonight. I don't remember walking to the car. I remember General Walsh's hand steadying my elbow, and I remember Lily's small fingers curling into the collar of my uniform as I finally allowed myself to cry. Behind me, I could still hear pieces of the argument breaking out in the living room, Marcus's voice rising, Diane's cutting through it, someone else trying to calm the room down. None of it mattered anymore. I had stopped being a person in that house and become a headline they were all arguing over, and the only thing I wanted was to get my daughter somewhere quiet. General Walsh waited until I'd gotten Lily buckled into her car seat before he spoke again. Take a breath, Captain. He handed me a folded handkerchief from his jacket. I've watched good people get destroyed by rumors before they ever got the chance to defend themselves. I don't intend to watch it happen to one of my own officers. I never cheated on him, I whispered. Not once. I believe you. Those 3 words did more for me in that moment than any argument I could have made for myself. He wrote 2 names on the back of a card before handing it to me, a military legal liaison, and a family attorney named Karen Whitfield who handled cases involving service members. If this becomes something bigger, don't face it without help. I stayed with my closest friend from officer training, Jess, who didn't ask a single question before setting up the guest room. She'd gone through OCS with me years earlier, and in all that time she'd never once seen me cry, not during the hardest weeks of training, not during my first deployment. That night, she just wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, put on a pot of coffee neither of us drank, and sat with me at her kitchen table while I stared at the wall trying to make sense of a night that refused to make sense. You don't have to talk about it, she said. But I'm not going anywhere. I appreciated that more than I could say. While Lily slept in a borrowed crib down the hall, my phone lit up over and over with messages from Marcus. Some angry. Some accusing. One line stopped me cold. Mom says you're the one who stormed out. I stared at it in disbelief. Diane had been the one pointing at the door. Now the story was already being rewritten, and it hadn't even been 12 hours. The next morning, while Marcus was supposedly at work, I went back to the house to collect a few of Lily's things. Diane wasn't there either. The house was silent in a way that felt almost unnatural. Upstairs, Marcus's laptop sat open on the desk, the screen dim but not locked. I had no intention of looking. But a notification slid across the top of the screen before I could look away. Brooke, everything went exactly like we planned. She'll never see it coming. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. I stood there for a long moment just staring at the name. Brooke. I had never heard it before in my life. 9 years of marriage, and there was an entire person living inside it I'd never once been told about. Every instinct told me to slam the laptop shut and run. But something colder and more disciplined, the part of me the army had spent a decade training, told me to slow down, document everything, and think before I moved. I glanced at the clock. Diane wasn't due back for at least another hour, and Marcus was supposedly at the office until 5. I had time, but not much of it, and every second felt like it was being measured out against me. I opened the thread. Brooke, did the family actually believe the report? Marcus, every single one of them. Brooke, did his mom really throw her out? Marcus, exactly the way we planned it. I photographed every screen, my hands shaking so badly I had to steady them against the desk. Further down, one message made my blood run cold. Brooke, once she's out of the picture, the house sale goes through faster, right? The house. Our house. He had never once mentioned selling it. A folder on the desktop labeled Q3 Docs caught my eye. Inside were bank statements I didn't recognize. A transfer of $16,200 from our joint savings account, dated 3 weeks earlier. Another for $11,000 2 weeks before that. In total, nearly $38,000 had quietly vanished from an account I thought we both still trusted each other with. I heard a car door slam outside. Diane. I emailed the photos to myself, closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it, grabbed Lily's diaper bag, and left before she reached the front porch. That afternoon, I drove straight to the office listed on General Walsh's card. Karen Whitfield listened without interrupting as I laid out everything, the ambush, the fake test, the messages, the transfers. When I finished, she scrolled slowly through the photographs on my phone, her expression darkening with each swipe. Captain Reyes, she finally said, I don't think your husband was only trying to humiliate you. She closed the folder in front of her. I think he was trying to defraud you. The words landed heavier than I expected. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart anymore. This was something with a paper trail, something that could be proven or disproven in a courtroom. From this point on, Karen said, you say nothing to him. You don't confront him. You let him believe his plan is working while we build the case that proves it wasn't. It was the hardest advice I've ever followed. Every instinct in me wanted to drive back to that house and demand answers. Instead, I went back to Jess's, sat on the floor while Lily stacked blocks and laughed at nothing in particular, and let the anger settle into something quieter and far more useful, patience. A week later, Karen called with an update that changed everything again. The money wasn't spent, she said. It was moved. Little by little, into a second account he opened 8 months ago. One you never knew existed. 8 months. Long before I'd even left for Pendleton. There's something else, she added. A consultation invoice. From a divorce attorney. Dated a month before you came home. I sat in silence on the other end of the line, doing the math in my head. He hadn't snapped one emotional night. He had been planning this for months while I was 3,000 miles away serving my country, believing I still had something to come home to. Karen insisted the only test that would matter in court had to go through an accredited lab, ordered by the county, with every step documented, nothing like the paper Marcus had thrown down on our coffee table. Marcus showed up 20 minutes late to the appointment, barely looking at me. Diane sat beside him with the same rigid posture she'd worn the night she pointed me toward the door. Lily sat quietly on my lap, clutching the stuffed rabbit that had somehow become her armor through all of this. The swab took less than 2 minutes. Lily first, then Marcus, then me. Every sample sealed, every signature witnessed, exactly the way General Walsh had told me real evidence should look. As we walked to the parking lot afterward, Marcus finally spoke. "You really think this changes anything?" I didn't answer. Karen had told me every unnecessary word only gave him another opportunity to twist my silence into guilt. I buckled Lily into her car seat and drove away without looking back. 3 days later, Karen called again. "The results are in. Can you come to the office?" I was there within the hour. She placed a sealed envelope on the desk between us and looked me in the eye before opening it. "Are you ready?" I nodded, even though I already knew what it would say. I had never doubted Lily was mine, biologically or otherwise. What I hadn't expected was how much it would still mean to see it written in numbers no one could argue with. Probability of paternity, 99.9998%. I cried for the first time in days, not because I'd been unsure, but because the truth had finally been given a form that no lie could touch. Marcus's response, when he received the same results that afternoon, was a single text message: "The lab must have made an error." Karen read it and shook her head. When someone won't accept a fact, they've stopped looking for the truth. They're just looking for a way out. For the next few days, I barely left Jess's house. I kept waiting for the sense of relief I thought the results would bring, but instead I mostly felt exhausted, like I'd been holding my breath for weeks and had only just now remembered how to let it out. Lily didn't understand any of it, of course. She only knew that her mother was home, that Jess's backyard had a swing set, and that mornings meant pancakes shaped badly like animals. Watching her chase a moth across the grass one afternoon, I realized she was the only person in this entire mess who hadn't changed at all. She was still exactly who she'd always been, unbothered by any of it. I wanted, more than anything, to keep it that way for her. Word spread fast after that, not because I told anyone, but because results like that don't stay quiet in a family that size. Marcus's younger sister, Ellie, called first. "I owe you an apology," she said. I sat there that night and said nothing. I should have. Then his aunt called. Then a cousin. Each conversation followed the same shape: "We should have asked questions. We're sorry." The apologies didn't erase the memory of that living room, of Lily's face pressed into my shoulder while a room full of relatives stared at us like criminals. But they mattered, in their own small way. A week later, Karen called with the piece of evidence that finally made everything click into place. A subpoena of Marcus's phone records had turned up hundreds of calls to the same number, Brooks, along with hotel reservations on weekends he'd told me were work trips. Then Brooke herself surrendered a set of messages to Karen's office, voluntarily, after receiving a legal notice. One line from Marcus stopped my breath entirely. "Marcus, don't worry, once the divorce is final it's all ours." Marcus, she'll never figure out the test wasn't real. Not a mistake. Not confusion. A confession, typed in his own words months before he'd even said them to my face. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Brooke. "I know you probably hate me," she said, her voice smaller than I expected. "He told me you two were already separated. That you only stayed married for the benefits." I said nothing. When I found out that wasn't true, I ended it. "I already gave your attorney everything I have." She paused. "Your daughter deserves better than what we did to you." I didn't forgive her that night. But I believed her. The hearing was scheduled for the second week of September, almost 4 months after that first terrible night. I wore a navy suit instead of my uniform, and Karen's advice echoed in my head the entire drive to the courthouse. "You're not walking in there as a soldier today," she'd told me. "You're walking in as a mother." The Wake County Courthouse was busier than I expected for a Tuesday morning, lawyers moving between rooms with rolling file boxes, families sitting stiffly in the hallway waiting for their names to be called. Jess had come along to watch Lily in the waiting area, and as I handed my daughter over I felt a strange calm settle over me, the same steady focus I used to feel right before a training exercise. Whatever happened in that courtroom, I had told the truth from the very first night. That, at least, hadn't changed. Marcus looked different in court, thinner, quieter, the confidence he'd worn that first night completely gone. Diane sat behind him, avoiding my eyes for what might have been the first time in 9 years. Karen laid out the evidence without ever raising her voice, the fraudulent test, the hidden account, the transfers to Brooke, the messages admitting the whole thing had been staged. The judge studied Marcus over his glasses. "Did you know this report had not been verified by an accredited laboratory?" "I wasn't sure," Marcus said. Karen slid one final exhibit across the table, the text where he'd admitted the report wasn't real. The courtroom went completely silent. "Mr. Bennett," the judge said, "this message suggests you knew precisely what you were doing." General Walsh hadn't been able to attend in person, but he'd submitted a written statement that the judge read aloud. "Captain Reyes has demonstrated integrity and sound judgment throughout her entire career. I trust her completely, as an officer and as a mother." After 4 hours, the ruling came down. Primary custody of Lily would remain with me. Marcus would receive supervised visitation contingent on completing counseling. The transferred funds would be returned to the marital estate, and Marcus would reimburse my legal costs stemming from the fraudulent test. As I gathered Lily's stroller to leave, Marcus stopped me outside the courtroom. "Do you think you won?" I looked down at my sleeping daughter, then back at him. This was never about winning. It was about making sure she never has to pay for what you did. I turned and walked away, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. 6 months passed before I saw Diane again. Life had finally settled into something that felt, for the first time in a long while, like peace. Lily was talking in full sentences, insisting on helping with breakfast even when that meant more egg on the floor than in the pan. I'd found a small rental not far from base, painted Lily's room a soft yellow, and started to feel, slowly, like the ground under my feet was solid again. One Saturday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I almost didn't answer it. Saturdays had become sacred, just me and Lily and no interruptions, but something made me look through the window first. Diane stood on the porch, smaller somehow than I remembered, holding a small paper bag. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said quietly. "Then why are you here?" "I've replayed that night every day since it happened." Her voice wavered. "I watched you standing there with her in your arms, and I never once asked if my own son was telling the truth." She looked down at her hands. "I chose loyalty to him over asking a single honest question, and I don't know how to undo that. I don't think I can." It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard her say. She handed me the bag. Inside was a small hand-knitted blanket that had belonged to Marcus's grandmother. "I'd like the chance to know my granddaughter," she said, "not that child, not her, but granddaughter." It was a small shift in language, but it meant something. "I can't pretend none of this happened," I told her. "I know. We'll start with short visits. That's all I can offer right now." She nodded, tears slipping down her face. That's more than I deserve. Forgiveness, I realized as I watched her walk back to her car, was never about pretending the pain hadn't happened. It was about refusing to let that pain become the only thing Lily ever inherited from any of us. A year after that terrible homecoming, my life looked almost nothing like it had that night. In most ways, it looked better than I'd ever imagined it could. I was promoted to major, and General Walsh pinned the new rank on my uniform himself, in a small ceremony with Jess and Lily watching from the front row. "I'm proud of the officer you've become," he told me afterward, then smiled down at Lily. Even prouder of the mother. Marcus completed his court-ordered counseling. His visits with Lily slowly became more natural, and while our conversations stayed short and centered entirely on her, the anger between us had faded into something quieter, not friendship, but peace enough to co-parent without conflict. Diane kept her word too. She never pushed for more than I could give. She earned it, one visit at a time, until the day I found her and Lily on the living room floor, wrapping a doll in that same knitted blanket, Lily announcing proudly, "Grandma made baby cozy." Not every relationship in my life came out of that year intact. Some things stayed broken, and I've learned to accept that not every scar needs to be healed to be survived. There are still holidays that feel a little hollow, still moments where I catch myself flinching at a closed laptop or a family gathering that goes quiet a beat too long. I don't think that ever fully disappears. But I've stopped waiting for it to. What I have instead is something steadier, a daughter who falls asleep every night without knowing how close she came to growing up inside a lie, a career I never stopped building even in the middle of the worst months of my life, and a small circle of people who showed up for me when it mattered, without needing to be asked twice. But if there's one thing I'd want anyone watching this to take with them, it's this: never let someone else's lie decide who you are. The truth doesn't always move fast, but it moves for good. And the strongest thing you can do when the world has already decided you're guilty isn't to shout louder, it's to keep living with the kind of honesty that eventually speaks for itself. If this story meant something to you, I'd be grateful if you shared it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you'd like more stories like this one, stay close, there are more still to tell.